anyways, so here we are.
Sorry, Nate. It's so good to see you.
It's so good to see you. I don't know if people know the story that I feel so connected to you because Elizabeth, you were one of the very first booksellers and really people of Bookland on Instagram who I ever connected with
Aw.
before anybody really knew about this book. And so it's just so great to be here with you and with the Fabled group. So yeah.
Well, I'm so thrilled because I love this book so much, and
Yeah.
just been really enjoying seeing your journey and how the book has taken off. It's just made me so happy for you,
That's
and
awesome.
so thrilled to get to talk to you tonight.
Thank you. Well,
Yes. And
I'm thrilled to be here with y'all.
Nina, I don't even think I got to introduce myself. I'm Allison. And hello, everyone there. I'm Allison. I'm one of the co-owners here at Fabled. And if you're
Awesome.
new, we are, this is our Fabled book club that we do every month. We get to Zoom with authors. Elizabeth is so good at picking our choices and convincing authors to come on here because we have wonderful customers who are here cheering them on as well. And we can't wait to talk with you more. If anybody has any questions for Nina, I will try to get to them at the end of our talk, and we might have written them down ourselves. So if you didn't get yours answered, hopefully we answer it in our talk. And then afterwards, we will be introducing our book for November. So if you want to stick around then, and also know that this is recorded. So if you have to anytime hop off, you will get this about 24 hours later. You'll get this link and it'll be recording. And I will, if you got here early, I will cut out all of our points of like trying to get Elizabeth in and trying
Oh,
to
I
get some
want to see it.
Oh yes. I
I was
always
like,
beg Kai, I'm like, please clean that up because that's just nobody wants to see a struggle. But maybe there's adrenaline and that makes you even more excited to talk to Nina. So who knows?
yes,
I do my best.
there's always a little adventure with our Zoom. So
Yes. But I'll let you introduce Nina officially.
yes. Okay. So tonight we are thrilled to have Nina Simon, who has worn many hats. She is a NASA engineer, a slam poet, game designer, museum director, and nonprofit CEO. That's just a typical job. Yeah. Her work on community participation in museums, libraries, parks, and the theaters have been featured in the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, NPR, and the TED Talk stage. A Mother-Daughter Murder Night is Nina's first novel. She wrote it as a love letter to her mother and as a way to entertain, comfort, and connect with her during a major health crisis. Born and raised in Los Angeles, Nina now lives off the grid in her Santa Cruz mountains with her family. More information on Nina can be found at her website, ninasimon.com. So thrilled to have you yet again. I'm so thankful that you are with us tonight, and love to talk to you about your book. You probably have heard this, but my daughter and I go on an annual mother-daughter beach trip. And this was the arc that I chose to bring with me. So when I was on the beach reading Mother-Daughter Murder Night, my daughter was giving me the side eye, wondering what crazy things my mom had in store for the trip. But it was the title grabbed me, but the story just really grabbed my heart, and I knew this was a very special book. So, can you tell us a little bit about how the story came to be?
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you so much again for having me. And it is so funny about the title that a few people have said, I thought that mothers and daughters would be murdering people. I was like, okay, that would also be a fun book, but that is not this book. So as you mentioned briefly in my bio, this is my first novel, but about my fifth career. And 3 years ago, I was running a nonprofit, had been a nonprofit CEO at that point for 10 years when I got a phone call that just terrified me. And I found out that my mom had tumors in her brain. She needed emergency brain surgery. And I rushed to Los Angeles to be with her. Although I should say, in true my mom fashion, she called me. She said, I need emergency brain surgery. Don't come. You're so busy. You have a big job. You have a kid. I'll be fine. And she delivered this message to both me and my sister. And then we immediately called each other and we were like, we're going right now. And went to Los Angeles. And my mom had surgery, and the good news was that the brain surgery went really well, but the bad news was that when they biopsied the tumors, they found that she had lung cancer, and that there was cancer spread throughout her body. And I don't know about y'all, but for me, this was just a wake up call moment like no other. I think some people have it when they have a kid, and they decide they want to change their life. But for me, having a kid did not feel that way. I love my kid, and I was excited to go back to work shortly after she was born. But and when my mom got sick, all I wanted to do was be with her, and all I wanted to work at was trying to help her, and trying to make that good time for us. And a lot of friends said to me, "You'll never regret this time you're spending with your mom," which was absolutely true. But what they didn't say, what I discovered was also true, is that that time that you spend caregiving for somebody is not always fun. It's certainly not easy. It's maybe even sometimes not even loving. And I think that for us, what happened was, as we went through this cascade of, health crises and hospital visits and emergency room visits and, changes in treatment, we just started to lose hope. And we needed to find a way to bring some love and joy into our life. And I had transitioned, downshifted at work to care for my mom. So when I was there, I had some time. Even though I was so focused on her, I wasn't running an organization. I wasn't even, responsible for my kid. My husband was doing that back at home. And so I really had a lot of time. And my mom and I have always loved murder mysteries. And she introduced me to them when I was a little girl, starting with, maybe not a little girl. I mean, little girl, Nancy Drew, fine. But, in middle school, we started reading Janet Ivanovich and Sue Grafton and Faye Kellerman. And I started pulling some old favorites off the shelf to read with her when she got sick. And then one day I just turned to her and I said, what if I tried writing one of these? And what if I made the lead detective somebody a little bit like you? And of course, Lana Rubicon, the lead, the star of Mother, Daughter, Murder Night, although all three of the women in this family are very important protagonists. She starts out as this tough LA Jewish woman who gets cancer and is forced to move up to the Monterey Bay with her, daughter and granddaughter in their ramshackle cottage by Elkhorn Slough. Now, in my case, my mom and I have never been estranged. We have a great relationship, but I could also never get her to leave Los Angeles. She is still there. My mom is doing well now, by the way, I should tell you, which is amazing. And we feel so grateful for that. But it turns out in fiction, if you can't get your real mom to move to your area, you can totally write your imaginary mom to move to your area. And I like to think that Lana Rubicon, I wrote her to be the superhero, the outrageous superhero who we needed. Where my mom was getting pushed around by doctors, Lana was pushing the doctors around. And where my mom was stuck in bed, Lana was leaping out of bed to go investigate this mystery. And I feel like I love all the women of the Rubicon family and a lot of the other characters in this world, but Lana most of all, because I really wrote her. My mom is much nicer than Lana, but my mom has a lot of that toughness, a lot of that humor, and I was just able to write that character with so much love because it's somebody who I love so much, and who I was caring for during this time. I should also say that my mom and I were really collaborators on this project, at least in the beginning, for weeks before I ever wrote a word. We would just sit around and talk about this premise. What would it be like if somebody like Lana had to move up to the Monterey Bay? What kind of mystery would this be? What kind of, who should the murderer be? Who should the victim be? What would they argue about? And we would just talk about this in her bed, in the hot tub, at the hospital. And actually, for a while, I felt like I can't really say I'm writing a book if I'm not writing anything down. But as it turned out, getting to know those characters and spitballing about them with my mom so much made it so that when I started writing the story, I felt like I knew these women deeply. And especially the dialogue became much easier to write because I really felt like I knew how these women would react to each other and play off of each other, and especially what Lana would do in certain situations. And so My mom was my first reader. Every scene in the beginning I wrote sitting on her bed while she slept. And I would just think, how can I make my mom smile? How can I move this story forward so she'll ask me what comes next? And then when she'd wake up, I'd pass the laptop to her. I'd go make her breakfast. And then we'd come back and we'd talk about what she read and what she liked and what she didn't. And we just went along like that through the whole first draft, really, with my mom reading everything, giving me some feedback, but most of all, just saying, what happens next? Keep going. And 6 months on, I had a full first draft. I was loving this path of writing fiction. My mom was doing better, but I was nervous to take a full-time job again because I wanted to be there for her if things got worse. And so I thought, okay, I'm going to try and really see what I could do with this. And maybe this is, the next career and the next path. And maybe this story could be something more than just this intimate, special project between my mom and I. And, now here we are.
I love
What a
it.
cool story. I love that. Well, most authors love this about our book club, but everybody has read the book here.
Good.
So if
So
you
we can talk
haven't,
spoilers.
please click. We are talking about spoilers. It's
Yep.
happening. So shut it down, come back and watch the recording when you have. But I am curious as far as like with murder stories, how an author comes out with the plot. I mean, you talked about you and your mom like kind of spitballing, like what happens in your case. Did you know who did it when you started, or was it more of discovering?
I would say in the beginning, I was discovering the family, and I think that this book is sort of a hybrid, right? Because it's both the family story of these three women reconnecting and building a new understanding with each other, and it's the story of them solving this murder mystery. And I think that there was a lot of time spent exploring what that family experience would look like that was really rooted in heart. But when it came to the murder mystery, I would say I had a much more analytical approach to how to do it. And actually, my mom and I, we read books about how to write murder mysteries. I took a lot of favorites off the shelf and was like diagramming, when were these suspects introduced? How did this happen? How does tension build? And so I knew from the beginning of actually writing the mystery that the broad strokes that, there were going to be these two murders, that and that Martin would be the bad guy. I will say that Martin's motive changed over the draft. So in the beginning, the first draft was, it was the first time I'd ever written something like this. So it was a lot less nuanced than the final book. And Martin was much more of just a greedy guy looking for the money from the ranch, and there was no backstory about the family. All of the suspects actually were just more broadly drawn in the first draft, and all of them got more layered, except for Paul, who actually got a little more silly as the drafts went on. I have a real soft spot for Paul. I just love him. But so yeah, I always knew that Martin was going to do it. But there were big things that changed, certainly big things about how it was revealed, how the different suspects, one of the things my agent helped me with in an early revision was she said, you have to think of these suspects as being on a lazy Susan, and it's not random when they investigate one versus another, and you don't totally drop somebody off the lazy Susan forever. Each clue that makes one suspect seem less suspicious should make you turn to should point to another suspect. So you keep turning that lazy Susan. So that was really helpful for me. And then also just thinking about and really playing with these elements around thinking about like sometimes writers talk about this idea of story questions, that you want a reader to always have a question in mind. And sometimes there's a story question that's answered within a given paragraph, or a given page. Is Paul going to get out of his car, when Lana is sitting there when they first meet? And then sometimes you have a story question that lasts for a long time. Like I've had a lot of people text me while they're reading it. I love it when people text me as they're reading it and they're like, now I think this, and questions like, is Ricardo Hal's son, is a question I've heard a lot that people held for a while, and so I think in a mystery, at least for me as a reader, I want story questions. I want enough resolution to keep me feeling like, oh, I got another thing. I got another, I got a little treat. But I also want big story questions that make the ending feel really satisfying. So that was important to me too. And I guess the last thing I'll say that changed was the ending. because in the very first draft, Martin was the killer, but he took Beth and Jack came up to the ranch on their own, and Martin kidnapped them and like took them down the creek, and Lana and Paul show up, and Lana has this kayak paddle and whacks Martin in the head and flips him into
Fun.
the water. And I loved a lot about that ending. But as we strengthened the family story about the three women, I really loved the idea of shifting to an idea that at the end, Lana solves, but Beth and Jack save. That, it takes all three of them. Lana resolves the mystery, but Beth and Jack have to save her. And I think that because the family stories arc is about them moving from independence to interdependence, I needed to find an ending that was not just another Lana does it all and could do it all herself.
So
Got it.
fascinating. I was going to ask really quick. I know Elizabeth has a question, but did your editor work with you a lot, or your agent work with you to change the story or to make it more nuanced?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I'm a first-time novelist, and, I do not have an MFA or anything like that, as you heard from my bio. And so I did the best I could on my first draft. And then I worked with some beta readers, some friends who, read it and gave me feedback and tried to, improve it on my own. And then when I signed with my agent, she said, this is great. I want to represent it, but I think there's a lot of work we have to do before we sell it. And we went through three major revisions over about 8 months. And most of that was about layering and adding nuance and richness to the characters. And then when we sold it to William Morrow, that was a faster process. We spent about 4 months in 2.5 edits. But again, it was about layering. And one of the surprises to me is I always think of editors as people who cut. But in the case of Mother Daughter Murder Night, the final book is about 30% longer than my first draft. So I kept being asked to, and a big change that happened with my editor was the first draft of this was written almost entirely in Lana's point of view, and Jack and Beth were much more marginal. And my editor really pushed for all three of the women to get almost equal page time and to really dive into how each of them see not just the mystery, but their lives and their lives together. And so that was a big change that they pushed for. The other thing that my editor really pushed for that surprised me was more nature writing. So, as you can see out here, I live in the woods. I love nature. And in my first draft, I really was being careful not to put in too much nature writing because I feared that I could become too self-indulgent because I just love nature so much. And then it was my editor kept saying, no, add more, add more. And so that was
You're like,
a
okay.
pleasure for me to get to add it because I was like, yeah, okay, I was holding myself back here. And Diane, I appreciate that. Yeah, you felt that way about the three characters contributing equally. And I think it really strengthened the story. And I think also an interesting thing I heard from a beta reader early on was somebody said, I love reading about Lana. She's so fun, but I can't identify with her. And I think that one of the things I'm always curious about, Allison, Elizabeth, I'm curious for you, is especially with women, I love to ask, which Rubicon woman do you feel like you identify with? But I think that particularly Beth, and actually the choice to start the prologue, to start and end the book from Beth's point of view, was partly because I feel like Beth is the character who is the easiest to step into her shoes, especially if you're a reader who might be in that sandwich generation. And I think that Lana and to some extent Jack do some very adventurous and admirable things that are fun to watch, but maybe don't feel as accessible or as things that we might be ready to leap in and do.
Yeah,
That's really
Lana was, and do you pronounce it Lana?
I
Or
do, but you know,
okay, well,
whatever.
I'm
My
gonna
mom says
pronounce it how
Lana,
you
so
choose.
who knows? Yeah.
But she was my favorite, and I think
Yeah.
I've seen some references to this is sort of a Gilmore Girl type of story,
Mhm.
but to me, this is like Jessica Fletcher walks into Sex and the City. Is kind of what I.
nice.
Nice.
And I just love that she just kind of does what she wants to do, which I
Yeah.
really appreciate. But I also I identify with Beth in that just kind of the exhaustion of taking care of both sides, and
Yeah.
that is
Yeah.
something I'm experiencing. But I saw I was very curious about, how you did you read a book on how to write a novel? You kind of addressed that a little bit, but I also saw that you had some sensitivity editors, and I was curious
Mhm.
what that meant. And
Yeah.
also with that, I've had to talk to a lot of people about the book, they're like, "Oh, cancer." I'm like, "No, it's
Mhm.
okay. Everyone is okay
Yeah.
on both
Yeah.
nonfiction and fiction." So,
Yeah. Yeah.
can you talk a little bit about that? What is a sensitivity editor to you? And
Yeah.
are there people who have cancer in their lives who are concerned about this book?
Mm. Yeah, that's so interesting. Yeah, and also to the learning, actually a book I found incredibly helpful that is so silly that I was just packing for a trip actually. It's called How to Write a Damn Good Murder Mystery. And I thought it was a great, it was very helpful for me starting out. Um, but okay, so sensitivity readers. So when I first when I first reached out to friends to beta read the book, the thing I was most focused on with regard to sensitivity, and then later the people who are acknowledged are also people who are hired by the publisher, was specifically about race and ethnicity. So, I wanted to write a world that's as diverse as the world that I live in, and I'm a white Jewish woman and have my own blind spots. And so with my beta readers, and some of my friends as I was writing, the things I was really interested in were, Jack as a mixed race teenager, and then Detective Ramirez, who I love, and I really think of as a key character. And I think that when the publishing house said to me, "Hey, we'd like to basically have a sensitivity reader for any character whose ethnicity is not your own, who is represented in this book." I was like, "Great, I'd love more, more input in that regard." As it turned out, the feedback there was quite light, or rather, it was sort of like, "This looks great." But I still appreciate the check, and appreciate some of the nuance of what was brought up around some of the characterization of some of those non-white characters. It is so interesting about cancer because I think it is and I've been seeing some posts, trigger warning on cancer. And yeah, even when I was looking for an agent, because originally there was no prologue, the prologue got added later. So it used to start right away with Lana getting sick. And
Mhm.
I remember, when you send things to try and get an agent, you're just usually sending the first 5 pages or the first 10 pages of the book. And I just remember thinking, oh my gosh, I'm saying this is a murder mystery. But what you're hit with right away is this person who has cancer. And are you going to think, oh, is this a cancer book? And I think that, I'm glad that we kept the cancer. I'm glad that we were able to add a prologue that gives it more of that spooky mystery vibe. And I will say the most meaningful emails I'm getting are from readers who have been touched by cancer, whether it is in their family or themselves. I just got an email the other day from a woman who said, I'm going through chemo, and I've learned that when I read a novel and a character has cancer, it's usually a signal that that character is going to die in the
Yeah.
book. And she was like, thank you for writing something different. And I think that to the extent that they say, write what you know, certainly what I was spending plenty of time learning about while writing this book was about what it's like to have stage 4 cancer and some of the humor in it as well. And so I felt like this was something that touches so many people. It's touched a lot of people in my life. And so I wanted to keep it. And, I hope that the benefit to people who have been touched by it is outweighs some of the deterrent that others might feel. I will say, when it got optioned for film and TV, I was really delighted that the producer came right out and said, the cancer element or the terminal disease element was really important to them, and that they thought that that brought another layer of meaning to the book. And because I could easily see a TV producer being like, well, let's get rid of that. Granted, they might still get rid of that. They can do whatever the heck they want. But I think that I've gotten a lot of meaningful feedback from people because of the cancer element.
I think that was really special that she was okay in the end, because a lot of people have cancer and they're okay in the end, but it's almost like in a movie when someone starts coughing, you're like, oh wow, they're gonna die.
Yeah.
So I think that made the book more special. But I was just curious what, what your feedback had been with that.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's interesting that I think for good or ill, publishers I've been very attentive to issues around race and ethnicity, around identity, but maybe a little less so to some other things, because it's interesting that, I'm Jewish. The characters in this book are Jewish. It's very lightly woven through, but there was never any conversation about whether that had to be engaged in the same way that some of the other elements were engaged, which I just thought was interesting.
That's really
I
interesting.
did have a marine biologist who came up to me on Saturday at a party and said, for your next book, you really need to have a scientist review it.
Oh.
I said, oh, okay. And I was like, what came up for you? She's like, that is not what seals eat. I was like, I don't even remember seals eating in the book, but okay. Thank you very much.
That is really funny.
Yeah.
I have a good lawyer friend that says like half of the law shows, she's like, sometimes they're doing stuff that's not even constitutional.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah.
So I mean,
Absolutely.
that was your one mistake or whatever. You're
Right.
doing
Yeah.
pretty good
Yeah.
for sure.
Yeah.
I would love to hear about your research in land trust disputes. Do you
Yeah.
have a personal connection with them? I'd love to hear you unravel that.
Yeah. So there's two pieces to that. One is that, I love the outdoors, and I've always been personally and professionally really interested in public space. When I ran a museum, I helped start up a public plaza in our town, and I'm just so passionate about the fact that we need places that everyone can access. And I spend a ton of time in nature, and so was very interested, just to the extent that in coastal California in particular, land is the resource that people fight over. It is the most precious resource financially and in terms of power. So I was interested in citing the mystery around land politics and conservation in some way. And then, my career has been in nonprofits, mostly on the art side, museums, libraries, theaters. But I have worked with some state and national parks and a couple of land trusts. And I think that for my first book, I didn't want to cite it right in a discipline that I had spent all my career. I didn't want to drop a dead body in a museum, at least not in my first book. It felt too close to me. It didn't seem like fun. But I thought I want to engage some of the contradictions and complexities of nonprofit work that I have experienced leading a museum. These complexities that come up about donor relationships and donor intent, and this question of, is it really doing good if it's exclusive in some ways? Or when do we, give do-gooders a pass, but there's something more going on? And I think that, I think it does a disservice to nonprofits and charity work if we just treat it all as on the side of the angels and don't think about it with the same rigor that we think about business. And so I don't know. I've always been curious about land trusts. I had given the keynote at the National Land Trust Association organization right before I started working on this book, so it felt like a good fit. It's funny, actually, because locally and nationally, people have been really divided in the land trust world about this book. So the Land Trust Alliance for America is like all about this book. I'm doing a lot of cross promotion with them. My local land trust, there are some people who are like, ooh, I was excited to read this and maybe to partner, but then when I read it, I'm not so sure, and of course the land trust in this book is fictitious. I love our local land trust. My husband and I are supporters of the local land trust. But I wanted to engage some of that complexity because I think it's a little bit unusual, a little bit nerdy, which I am, and very real to kind of an underexposed world in how land is managed. I will say that there were whole other versions of looking at land. I landed with land trust, but at one point I was really looking at a land conflict around Silicon Valley e-waste and where that waste is being dumped and maybe dumping it near Elkhorn Slough. At one point I was looking at some issues around ag and labor, which is big in Salinas Valley. And so land trusts are where I ended up, but I'm curious about a lot of these different issues around how land is protected, conserved, used, bought, and sold in California.
That's so interesting because I at one point told Elizabeth that the scene with Lana, with the fire, it felt a little bit like Aaron Brockovich, which again
Mhm.
was land and water and all that kind of stuff
Yes.
too. So
Yeah.
that's
Yeah,
great.
absolutely. Yeah. And I think that ultimately, I hope, as somebody who cares about land trusts, and I think that the Land Trust Alliance, the sense was like, it is a good thing if more people even understand that there is a thing called a land trust. And it's a good thing if there's some understanding that they do different kinds of things. Whether you think they might also do shady things or whether you think they might be murder suspects, that's a little more debatably good. But I hope that it just sort of raises awareness about a side of how land is managed that might not be on people's radar.
Well, speaking of the land, can you tell us a little bit more about the Elkhorn Slough? When I was reading the book, I Googled it and it's just
Yes.
beautiful. What is
Yes.
your connection to that place? And can you describe it a little bit more for us? And I'm so glad you added a bunch of nature writing because that really makes a big difference to me in books.
Oh, good. Oh, I'm so glad. And yes, I would love to. And actually, can I share screen and show you all some pictures? Would you like to do that?
Sure.
Sure. I'm
Okay, let
trying to
me see
remember
if I
how I
oh,
can.
okay, maybe the host this might be hard. If the
No, I was
host
like,
can enable screen
I know
sharing,
I've
great. If
done
not,
it
that's okay.
before, but
Um, I'll chat a little bit while you
okay.
explore.
Yes.
Um, so Elkhorn Slough is about 30 miles south of where I live. And again, kind of like not wanting to drop a dead body in a museum, I wanted for my first book to set it somewhere that was easily accessible to me and certainly a real place, but not right in my backyard, and especially not right in the city where I worked for so many years. And so Elkhorn Slough is actually a place my mom introduced me to. It's a beautiful marine preserve, for hiking, for paddling. And I had never really been there, but just before the pandemic, just before my mom got sick, I went out there for the first time. And then after she got sick, I really got into paddleboarding, which I feel like a lot of people, that was sort of a pandemic bubble, just like biking was kind of. So I was in the paddleboarding pandemic bubble. And so I would just go out to Elkhorn Slough. And I just loved how it's this combination a very wild and natural and just incredible wildlife. I mean, just otters on demand. I mean, you will never go there and not see an otter. But then also at the same time, very spooky, very eerie. And there's all of this industrial activity on the edge of nature. So there's the old power plant, there's the working marina, there's a railroad, there's the highway. There are derelict, falling down old dairy buildings. And actually, my daughter, who was about 10, or no, so she's 10 now, she was about 7 when I was writing this book. She would come out and she would like perch on the front of my paddleboard. And we'd just be paddling along, looking at the otters and the jellyfish. And I was just getting a feel for the place. And then she would just point out at some like falling down shack on the bank. And she'd be like, "Look, mom, you should kill somebody right over there." And it was both like very cute and very creepy all at the same time. And then, ooh, and I see that. Thank you. Okay, great.
Yes.
I'm
I
going to
figured
share
it out.
photos. Okay,
Look
this
at
is
you.
a picture of Elkhorn Slough that I think that I took that kind of captures, I think, that combination of beauty and spookiness. So this is actually me standing on the land of the ranch, the real Roadhouse Ranch. So let me see. Hold on if I can get back. So one of the things that happened as I was writing this book is I was telling a friend about it. And I was telling them a friend about this imaginary ranch I'd made up. And my friend said, "Oh, you mean Wally's ranch?" I'm like, "What are you talking about?" And they're like, "This is Wally. You can see a picture of him here. He's not like Hal Rhodes at all. He's a very Willie Nelson kind of hippie-ish guy." But he said, "Yeah, there's a guy named Wally who manages this ranch on the north side of Elkhorn Slough. And let me call him." And, 2 weeks later, Wally and I were out with his dog, Ray, horseback riding over this ranch. This is actually the real historic cemetery of the Roadhouse family. And you can see the slough behind it. And you can kind of see this curly queuing creek. You can imagine how this marshland and how it comes and goes into the main part of the water. So this is Elkhorn Slough, and this is the real ranch. And you can see some of this eeriness and creepiness. Oh, there's me and my mom and my
Oh,
daughter. I don't know if there's any more. Oh, there's a lot more slough pictures. But let me see if I can find one where. So okay, and then yeah, this is a good sense of when you go down to the slough, so there is a real kayak shack, and they're running kayak tours all the time down there. And people are going out, and so it's all real. It's actually the most real part of the book in a lot of ways is Elkhorn Slough and how it's all set up. And again, I felt like as my first time novel, I was not ready to invent a place or to, move a lot of things around. I moved a few things around, but mostly it's very faithful. And they're even when I go paddling there, I can see the house that I think of as Beth's house. And I can see this like window glinting in the background. And so it really, for me, is the place in this story. And actually, one of the people who owns one of the kayak shops down there contacted me. I haven't had time yet to do this, but he's like, "Hey, I read your book. Could we do a tour where maybe everybody wears high heels?" And I'm like, "Yes, let's do it." So hopefully in the new year we'll figure that out.
Well, I
You're all
love that
invited.
you showed the picture. When you showed the picture, I was like, oh, of course. You painted that in my mind. And so it
Oh,
looked
good.
completely familiar. So
Oh, I'm
that
so
I
glad.
don't think not often do you get to see what the author was writing. So that is really, really remarkable and well done because it looked
you.
very familiar to me. Okay, so we were thrilled when we heard that your book was a Reese pick. I would love to hear how you got the news and what that process was like.
Yeah, so I know it was such an amazing surprise. So as probably many people here know, books get acquired by a publisher 1 to 3 years before they come out. And in my case, it was actually pretty fast. The book was acquired the day before my birthday in
Oh,
2022, which is in July. And so I had this amazing birthday in 2022. And the book was going to come out in September of 2023. So fast forward, it's the day before my birthday of this year, 2023. We're up in rural Washington, where my husband's from. I am sitting on the porch picking cherries and listening to the audiobook of Demon Copperhead, which I don't listen to a lot of books on audio, but boy, was that a great one on audio. Incredible narrator. And this phone call comes in from a number I don't recognize in New York. Sorry, there's a plane coming overhead here. And, usually these days you get so many spam calls that you wouldn't pick up. But because I had been listening to the audiobook, it was easy for me to just toggle over and take the call. And it was my editor who has never called me. I mean, we've talked on the phone plenty of times, but it's always like we set it up a week in advance and da 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 da. And here she is just calling me. And she said, are you sitting down? And I was like, well, I'm pitting some cherries. I don't know. And, she said, well, put down the cherries. I have something big to tell you. And she told me that, Reese had picked the book for her book club. And it was so incredible. And, my very first question to her was, can I tell my mom? And she said, yes, you can tell your mom. I was like, can I tell my sister? She said, no, you can't tell your sister. And I was like, okay. And I listened to them because I was terrified about, I knew what a big deal this was. And I wanted to, do everything I was supposed to do about keeping it secret. But really, when I heard the news, the thing that went through my mind was, oh, I can't wait to tell my mom. And also, oh, this means a lot of people are going to see this book. Because, as a debut novelist, it is not easy for a book to get out there. There are things like, Elizabeth was so nice to lend her voice to champion the book, and it became an Indie Next pick, which was terrific. We actually found that out the day after the Reese pick, which was unreal.
probably
To
the
have those things come
same
one too.
feeling, Elizabeth,
Yes,
right?
Elizabeth and
totally.
Ray,
Well,
we get
and
that a lot.
right. The other joke in my family now is that like now all birthdays are ruined. Like now next year I'm expecting my husband to bring home like a
Right.
unicorn and but yeah, I just knew, wow, this means a lot of people are going to see this book. And I think that my guess is, folks on this call who are connected to Fabled, and who are engaged with books and bookstores, I feel like I'm a very avid reader, and sometimes I'm aware of these celebrity picks and sometimes I'm not. But I'll tell you, over the last month and a half, the number of, particularly women, but the number of readers who I have met who are telling me stories about how Reese's book club brought them back to reading after a long time of not reading, or how their sister always follows Reese and now they read those books together. It's just such a beautiful thing. And I think that it's easy sometimes with celebrity stuff to get cynical or think, oh, it's just about X, Y, or Z. But the fact that this is an endorsement that involves no money exchanging hands of any kind, and it's just a gift to the reading and writing community, I feel blessed by it, and am really, really honored. Yeah.
Yeah,
Really
this
great.
was funny. We picked it for one of our subscription boxes,
Right.
our Pioneer box, and I I emailed my publisher and just said, I'd like these books, the day before
Right.
it comes out. And they're like, that's great. You're going to need to sign a non-disclosure agreement. And I was like, I feel like there's going to be a sticker on this book. So that was great. And I wondered, there's some, people have issues sometimes with the little sticker on there, but I'm sure
Right.
that's nothing but good things for the
Well, and
author.
it's so funny. I don't know if this has happened at y'all's store, but some printings have had the sticker and some printings haven't. They've had some bumps with that. And so actually I was just down at my local independent bookstore, Bookshop Santa Cruz, yesterday. I go in every Monday to sign personalizations, and they have a whole bunch of books that have stickers and a whole bunch of books that don't. And
Wow.
they told me that now they have customers who come in and say, "Oh, I would like the one without the sticker," or "I would like the one with the," so it's like they have both. So I'm like, okay, I guess there's a good thing to come out
Yes.
of this. But yeah,
Very
yeah,
strong
it's
opinions.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Well, just speaking about being a debut novelist, have there been any surprises along the way for you, like as a
Yeah.
debut novelist?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that one surprise is that I can't speak for people across the whole literary community, but people in the crime fiction world are so nice. And I've heard before, like, oh, maybe they're so nice because they're writing about murder, so they get it out on the page. But, I've been to just a couple of writing conferences. Well, first of all, I'll say I feel like I did this backwards because I think a lot of people, they work on a book for a long time. They go to some conferences, they maybe have a writing group, they build a writing community, and then they get an agent and they publish a book. And for me, because I wrote this book in this very intimate way with my mom, and then we were blessed that it sold quickly, I feel like I've been playing catch up to now build a writing community. But I've been to a couple of crime writing conferences, and it has just been a blast. And if there are any people here who love crime fiction, I would say go to one of these regional events or the national event, because it's not that expensive compared to professional conferences. And unlike, I've been to so many work conferences, right? And everybody's trying to do business. And at this, it's like everybody's just loves books, and it's just a joy. I don't know. I'm leaving at 4:15 tomorrow morning to go to do my first book festival. I mean, I feel like I'm just learning so much in entering. I think a big surprise for me has been, I thought I was a big reader. I thought I was a wide reader. I thought I understood something about books. I'm a very active library and bookstore participant. And I feel like I'm just learning. I never knew about ARCs. I didn't know those existed, that there were advanced reader copies. I didn't know that, there were all these festivals and things. I mean, I had no clue. I just today got the first time a book in the mail that will come out next spring that somebody wants me to read and maybe write a blurb for. I mean, my agent was like, well, we don't want you to do too many of the, I don't want it to be burdensome. And my husband's like, you just want all the books, don't you? I'm like, yeah, I want all the books. And so I feel like I'm just entering into this time with so much learning and so much joy, and just a lot of excitement. And I think that, you know, I can say this to y'all because you've already all read this book, but I hope this is the worst novel I write. I hope I keep getting better and I keep learning more. And I certainly feel like I have so much more to learn. And that's really exciting to me. One other surprise was I thought that, you know, I thought an editor in my work life before, it had been very creative, but very collaborative in a way where everybody's hands were in the document, right? Whether it was a grant proposal or whether it was exhibit labels. And I've been really surprised that when you're an author working with an editor, your editor is giving you notes about what is and isn't working, but it's your responsibility as the author to decide what to do with that and how to address it. And there has never ever been an instance where my editor changed one word. They always are just bringing up questions, bringing up ideas, bringing up suggestions. And I think that that's been a really powerful and very respectful and different kind of collaborative relationship than I've had in other creative environments in the past.
That is fascinating. I know, because I mean, even though we're in the book world, we have tons of documents where we all have edited
Totally.
and changed words. And so that has to be really interesting to be like, oh, it's all on me. And this is
Yeah.
my book. And so
Right.
that's a very fascinating perspective for sure.
And it's like scary and good. I like to think of it like the collaborative work I used to do was all about group work. We're all at the table
Mhm.
doing it together. And now I feel it's more like a relay race where there are these baton passes. Okay, I have gotten this draft as good as I can. Now I'm handing it to you. Okay, you are giving me back your editorial notes. Now I'm doing, and so I feel like it's a different kind of relationship. And there are positives and negatives to it, but I'm certainly learning a lot from it. And I honestly I'm just so curious whenever I come into a new way to be creative.
Yeah. So the movie rights have been optioned, right?
Yes.
That is so exciting. If you could cast anyone, do you already have in your mind who you would like to cast as the characters?
I mean, I'm not very good at this. I'd love anybody's suggestions. The only one who I have a dream for is Lana. And it actually relates to Lana's age because when I first wrote Lana, my mom was 72 when I wrote this book. And I at first wrote Lana to be around my mom's age. And my mom was like, nobody's going to care about somebody who's 72. I don't agree with this, but she's like, let's make her 62. So when I queried it, when I went to get an agent, Lana was 62. And one of the things my agent said was we should age Lana down. And she wanted her to be somewhere between 54 and 58. And I looked up all of these famous, amazing actresses online. And I said, Sandra Bullock is 57. There is no world in which Lana is too young for Sandra Bullock to play her. And I feel like Sandra Bullock is, to me, like somebody who blends physical comedy with toughness in this just incredible way. I think she's one of the funniest actresses
Totally.
working today, and she's sexy and all the things. And so she's my dream for Lana, but I don't really have dreams for anybody else. And who knows? I mean, the way the optioning works, this could end up being a book about an alien, a lizard, and a chicken by the time they, make it
Right.
into a show. So, but I mean, we'll see what happens. Do you have any casting ideas?
I mean, if you have the biggest budget, I would say Meryl Streep for
Yeah.
Lana. Would be so good at which I mean, I loved her character too, just that she like didn't take no for an answer. She was so driven. And so I feel like Meryl Streep could do a really good job as
Yeah.
her. But when you said Emily Gilmore or the Gilmore Girls, I was like,
Yeah.
oh, that's excellent choice too.
Well, and I feel like I got some ads for a murder mystery show with the woman who played Emily in it
Oh,
recently. I only saw
interesting.
the ads for like a minute. I never saw the show, but I feel like she was kind of this sassy um m- uh mystery crime solver, but maybe that only happened on my Instagram feed. I don't
Yeah,
know. Yeah.
that is so funny. Elizabeth, do you have anyone that you might pick?
I don't know anybody. This
Yeah.
is I
Elizabeth is a reader, and
Yeah,
so
me
something
too.
like
Me too, Elizabeth. I'm with you.
yeah.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know,
sometimes I'll
pick
show
some
her
rando like from a Hallmark movie, and that works for me. I don't know.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
oh my gosh, Katie has the greatest comment. Meryl Streep playing Lana would be the little Devil Wears Prada meets Only Murders in the Building.
That's
Mm.
right. Yeah, that
Very
would be.
good.
Yeah. Although I think
Okay.
Sandra Bullock is, she's on her way there.
Oh
Yeah,
my
yeah.
gosh. I know. I missed her in movies. I hope she gets back to them soon because
Well, she did that Lost City of D, which was
oh,
about,
that's
or Lost
true.
City. Yeah, yeah. That apparently that movie, the original title was The Lost City of D, and then they took out the of D, which,
Funny.
yeah, anyway.
That's interesting.
Wow.
oh
Anyway, I
It's a
don't know.
novel. Yeah.
Okay, so can you tell us a little bit about what you're working on next?
Yeah. So, I have no idea if there will ever be a sequel to Mother Daughter Murder Night, and that is sort of not in my hands. That's about how this book does and the publisher and da 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 da. So I've started working on some other projects. I actually wrote half. This was a debut novelist surprise. I wrote half of a book too that I then showed to my agent. She said, "This is great. This can't be your book too," and that it was just too different. And so I put that one on the shelf. And so I'm working on a book now that's another a murder mystery that takes place on a Pacific island and involves two sisters who grew up on this island. Their parents were research scientists, and they have to come back to the island to, deal with a dead body in a volcano. And actually, you're all are the first people I've said this to, and I realize this is being recorded, and I have
That's
no
okay.
idea whether my agent will be like, you should not tell any of this to anybody, but I'm a very open person. I'm just so excited that finally she and I are on the same page about a great concept to move forward with. But what I like to say, and actually, who knows what'll happen with that book, but what I like to say is I feel confident there's going to be strong women and some dead bodies, and we'll see what they'll be doing.
What more could you ask for?
Yeah,
That's
exactly.
my favorite combination.
Yeah.
And send me a copy right away, because this is, this sounds right up my alley.
Yes.
Nice.
So
Excellent.
happy
Yes,
to.
you can tell your editor, like, I'm just working on my marketing. I've got everyone hooked on the Zoom.
I haven't even talked to my editor about this book yet, so
That's
so you heard it
hilarious.
here first, and you're not going to
Secret
tell
is
many
safe
people.
with us.
Yes, we won't tell anybody. Don't worry.
Yeah.
Well, this is so much fun, Nina. Oh my gosh, I could hear about just your process and the story all day, but I guess we have other stuff to do. But this has been so much fun. And I hope everybody enjoyed it. And we're going to introduce our November pick, if that sounds okay. I'm going to let Elizabeth do that.
Yes, I am so excited. My cat's just gone crazy. I'm so sorry. I'm so excited to announce that our November pick is Strange Sally Diamond by Liz Nugent. Now, Liz has heard through the grapevine how much I love Irish crime novels, and she reached out to us and said, well, I want to talk to you. So she's in Ireland, but so our book club will not be at 7 like it always is. It will be at noon on, is it November the 9th? Kai?
Yes.
I think, okay. Noon, so that grab a lunch, sit down and enjoy it. But she's phenomenal. This book it sort of reminds me of Mother-Daughter Murder Night, where it's a murder mystery plus there's a lot of relationships, there's a lot to talk about. November 7th.
November 7th. Yes.
7th. Yes.
It's a dark one though. Hang on to your hats. Yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
Have you read it?
Oh yeah, so wild.
That is up Elizabeth's alley. She'll be like, I don't think this one's very dark. And then I'll read it. I'm like, oh my gosh. So I will buckle up.
There's a lot to discuss, wouldn't you say, Nina? Yes. And so anyway, I'm thrilled to get to talk to her. And so sign up. We got the links here, and look forward to seeing everyone next month. But Nina, I'm just cheering you on from Central Texas. We love your book and can't wait to see what you've got next.
Thank you so much. And I'd love to keep in touch. And, Elizabeth and I have been having fun being connected on Instagram. I am Nina K. Simon on Instagram and kind of everywhere, and ninaksimon.com. And I'll put those in the chat. And thank you so much for your support. I can't wait to visit. It's going to be terrific when I get to finally visit your wonderful store.
Come to Fabled. We would love it.
I know. I want to come. So yeah, thank you. All right. Have a great night.
Guys. We'll see
Good
you
night,
later.
everybody.
Bye.